I realize that making sweeping judgments can be risky, but I'm going to do it anyway. The Second Symphony of Robert Schumann might be the single most powerful example of the Romantic ideal in music. Here's why I say this. The heart of the Romantic movement was individual, personal expression, that all of us and our feelings, our opinions are worth something and not just part of a big state or church or philosophical collective, as in the Enlightenment. Our individual relationship with ourselves, with one another, with God, with nature, are primary. And thus, the arts now played a major role in this expression. And I feel that in music, Robert Schumann, his person, his life, and his art, really does epitomize the Romantic philosophy. And his Second Symphony, its scope, its grandeur, its depth of expression, elevates this work, in my opinion, to the pinnacle, the purest embodiment of the Romantic aesthetic, its true soul. And Schumann's life reads like the ultimate Romantic novel, his love for the written word, poetry and literature in which he immersed himself as a youth. His father dies, and his stern mother insists that Robert study law. How many times have we heard that one before, right? Which, of course, only increases his drive to pursue music. Studying piano with the renowned Friedrich Wieck, living hand-to-mouth with his circle of bohemian friends known as the Band of David, whose mission was to vanquish the Philistines of the artistic world, writing poetry and creating imaginary names for himself and his friends, writing his diary in code. He invented two fantasy names for himself: Florestan, the dynamic, volatile, headstrong side of his personality, and Eusebius, the dreamy, sensitive, melancholy side. He founded his own periodical, the New Journal for Music, which he used to champion the music of young composers. He fell madly in love with his teacher's daughter, the famous pianist Clara Wieck. And true to form, as in Romance novels, the father rejects the vagabond Robert Schumann as his son-in-law, and he does all he can do to keep his daughter away from this headstrong young dreamer. And so now, it's secret letters and meetings, stolen kisses, following his beloved around Europe on her concert tours, if only to observe her from afar. And of course, composing a wealth of music, mostly for the piano, including musical dedications to his beloved. And when she actually played one of his works on a concert program in Leipzig, a work he described as "my heart's cry for you," it only increased the feverish intensity of his passion. This, the composer Robert Schumann, whose Second Symphony we will examine. What a story. And Robert and Clara managed to outwit, outplay, and outlast the old man, even after he brought a nasty year-long lawsuit to prevent the marriage. It was a huge scandal, but the marriage finally took place in 1840, followed by a musical outpouring from the composer, songs and symphonies, literary works for chorus and orchestra. But, as in so many Romantic tales, the clouds eventually began to appear on the horizon. It was in 1844, Schumann, having lost out on a couple of important musical posts he applied for, began a downward emotional spiral. As he and his family settled in Dresden, he began to experience increasingly severe mental problems, whether this was genetically related to his family's history, which had always haunted him, or the effects of a certain common disease that were gradually beginning to appear. The composer became more delusional and detached from the real world. And now, as we continue down this troubling path, it's important that we turn to the spiritual aspect of the Romantic movement, the connection of man, nature, and God, whether an actual being, a deity, or more of a pantheistic concept, God present in all creation in the universe. Spirituality remained a powerful force in 19th century expression. A few years after the traumatic events of 1844, Schumann composed his piano work, Album for the Young, for his three daughters to play. And the fourth piece in this collection is a chorale, a sacred choral work, and it's a melody which Bach had used 100 years earlier in his cantata number 39. Years ago, I sang this same hymn in church to the English words, God of mercy and compassion. But the original chorale in German is Selig sind die aus Erbarmen. Blessed are those who, out of mercy, take on themselves the needs of others. plead faithfully to God for them. Some of those harmonies are mine, but that's the tune. It's so gorgeous. And come home. And Schumann's setting is lovely in its simplicity, and he set this chorale again for his little daughters to play, okay? And as he composed the Second Symphony, like so many other great composers before and after him, Mozart and Beethoven, Brahms and Mahler, Schumann turned to the music of Bach, and its profound spiritual qualities would prove to be something of a lifesaver for him during this time. In late 1844, while starting work on his monumental setting of Goethe's Faust, Schumann's own demons appeared, and Clara found her husband weeping uncontrollably. He could barely walk. He was tormented by imaginary apparitions and sensations. He was actually unable to listen to music due to a painful whistling in his ears. It was an extremely serious attack of chronic depression from which he was only able to pull himself out gradually. And within the next decade, the illness would completely overtake him. And his final 2.5 years were spent in a sanitarium, and he was not even allowed to see his beloved wife, thus providing the tragic conclusion, the denouement, to the romantic ballad of Robert Schumann. But that was in the future. And the Symphony No. 2 in C major was a product of the year 1845, when Schumann had temporarily overcome his illness, a period in which he struggled to regain his creative strength after his harrowing descent into depression, a period which produced this immensely powerful music, warm, romantic to the core, lyrical and uplifting, but also dark and tempestuous, with an intensity and an energy that seems to burst forth from every page. And as we listen, it's so important to recall Schumann, the literary man, the poet and author and publisher, the chronicler of his own life through his personal diaries. Why is this important? Since there is no doubt that the Second Symphony, on some level, is an autobiographical summary of Schumann's great emotional and physical trials of 1844, especially when we get to the final movement. So what I will do is a general overview of the first three movements so that we can concentrate on the finale. So the symphony opens with a slow introduction, which immediately features two important motives. Okay, first is a simple fanfare in the brass, 2 notes, a rising fifth, C and G, the basic tonic and dominant notes of C major. And second, as a foundation, the strings are gently flowing, they're moving through time, it seems, tranquil and serene, but very confident, like so. And this phrase is structured in groups of 3 notes, etc. And together with the brass fanfare in the distance, there's this unmistakable sense of some benign force that's hovering over the music, calm and contemplative, solemn in its strength and grandeur, as if it's watching over us. Thus, the mighty symphony begins in a somewhat legendary mode, and these 2 motives, the brass fanfare and the flowing strings, will return often to help unify the work's architecture. But more significant, I think, is the definite hymn-like character of this music. And now the second part of this opening, this introduction, we hear this melody with this rising interval. A distinctive interval, yes? And it's played by the woodwind choir like so. Definite liturgical harmonies. Yes. And now it merges with the flowing strings. And a moment later, Schumann will use this motive in a new version, like so. Answered by this brisk martial figure. And in true symphonic fashion, Schumann uses these motives to build intensity and speed until the main allegro of this movement bursts out with the martial motive. But it's soft, it's breathless. I should play it again, softer. It has this sort of electric energy to it that will propel this entire movement. And the rising motive now reappears. So I guess it's now the official secondary theme of the allegro, along with a surging string figure. And those vigorous rushing figures, which are also built in groups of 3 notes, they will provide non-stop energy to this music, as you will hear when Schumann brings back the opening solemn string tune. Right? And he uses it now as the closing theme of the allegro exposition by jazzing it up so that it fits right in with the excitement of this allegro. And he ends up with a big restatement of our main theme in the dominant key of G for a perfect close to the exposition. What a rousing, heroic way to close off the exposition. And that sort of spirit and energy will be needed in the finale. And you heard the central development section beginning there, where Schumann uses the main motives to build a continually evolving span. And he makes much use of that surging motive. Again, all of this phrased in groups of 3 notes. But always with Schumann, he uses his trademark string tremolo. It's not actually a tremolo. It's the strings, instead of playing ba-da-da-da-da-da, single notes, they always play in Schumann's music. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-bum. They double time it, whatnot. And this is Schumann's own trademark of string writing. Rather controversial, too, but it creates an intensity that never lets up. And it turns out that this ascending figure, is a very fast inversion of the tranquil string motive from the opening, from the introduction. The same thing, just played in inversion. This also plays a major part in the development. And this supercharged music, this is Florestan, the wild, headstrong side of Schumann's personality. Now the recapitulation basically restates the exposition in the tonic key of C. And as is typical with Schumann, his coda begins with what sounds like a new theme. It's in A major, it's gentle and bucolic, but it's actually another transformation of the string theme from the opening, which now in the coda is this. With clarinets and bassoons, the typical Bavarian Gemütlichkeit sound. All of it built variations of. It is just brilliant. But what about the opening brass fanfare? Well, Well, it now begins to emerge as the music drives towards its conclusion, but it's now filled in with connecting notes like so. The fanfare is, but now Schumann fills it in like so. And this new version of the fanfare, bum, 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 will reappear in the final moments of the symphony, like it's predestined. So listen now as the noble fanfare from the opening now returns amidst the frenetic excitement of the first movement coda. And there is clearly a liturgical, chorale-like element in these harmonies. But the intensity never lets up. It's absolutely amazing. This is Schumann's state of mind. And after this supercharged first movement, Schumann can't wait to get to the Scherzo. Usually the Scherzo is the symphony's third movement, but here it is the second. And this is the famous Schumann Scherzo, the one that every violinist has to be able to play in their sleep for their audition. And it's a perpetual motion for the violins, a continual stream of 16th notes, and very difficult in the way that it's laid out for the instrument. You'd almost swear that Schumann had written this as a piano etude, since it lies pretty well for the keyboard. But what's more important for our purposes is the non-stop, frenetic, nervous energy. It's like a continuation of the first movement that dashes from one key to another in a very unpredictable way. Some might say volatile, some may even say an unstable way. Beginning with the prominent diminished seventh chord. And we know how unstable those can be. It's the first thing that we hear, which can lead anywhere, but it resolves to C major. But just for a second. So what I want to do here now is for you to hear just the harmonic outline, the twisting, winding ground plan that Schumann worked out for the main scherzo. Just the underlying chords, the harmonies, like so. Repeat. Cuckoo. So there are the harmonies that provide the structural blueprint for the main scherzo. And now here it is in all of its precipitous brilliance. And as we know, a scherzo has a contrasting middle section called the trio. But this scherzo features two trios. We've seen how Beethoven expanded the scherzo into 5 parts: scherzo, trio, scherzo, trio, scherzo. But in that pattern, the 2 trios were the same music, just repeated. But Schumann writes 2 totally different trios, both of which reveal clues about the ultimate destination of this symphony. The first trio is charming and bucolic in nature. It's in the dominant key of G major, with lively, chattering exchanges between woodwinds and strings. There, did you notice that sudden tinge of melancholy? It It definitely has a hymn-like quality to it, a very common progression in liturgical music. But it vanishes very quickly, and the jolly animated music returns, leading back to the turbulence of the main scherzo, a literal repeat, except where the violins get another workout. And then suddenly, the second trio is upon us, also in G major, the dominant key. And amid so much intense, agitated music, we hear this. It's in G major in 4 voices, and it's set exactly in the style of the chorale, which Schumann wrote for his little daughters to play. But this time there is no doubting the hymn-like character of this music, which features this prominent phrase, this rising figure, and this darkening of the harmony. All of this points ahead to the ultimate destination of the symphony. And now the oboes and clarinets repeat this theme, but in the tonic key of C major, where the rising figure more clearly predicts the same figure in the same key as we'll hear it in the finale. It's this. Here it is. And Schumann now accompanies the woodwinds with the violas, like so. As if he's writing contrapuntal music for the church. So this second trio, very important in Schumann's overall structural and emotional plan. And incidentally, that spot I pointed out where the harmonies darken for just a bit in the chorale. These 4 notes in the melody. In German, if you give these notes their names, that's B flat. In German, it's just plain B. B, this is A, this is C, and in German, B natural is H. B, A, C, H. This is Bach's own spelling of his name in music, which Schumann intentionally uses now in this second trio. Schumann was clearly channeling the spiritual world of Bach here in this second trio, a sanctuary in the middle of this agitated, high-strung scherzo. But the little spark from the main scherzo theme starts to infiltrate the hymn and reignites the scherzo. And we're off to the races again. The scherzo reappears, this time leading to a raucous coda. But at the very last minute, the trumpets and horns, a fleeting and welcome reappearance of the symphony's opening fanfare motive amidst the frenzy of this coda. And despite the virtuosic thrill of this scherzo, there is a dark, unsettled, manic energy to it, not necessarily all good, that is tempered by the bucolic first trio and the hymn-like second trio. And that fleeting glimpse of the brass fanfare at the end certainly brightens things, and again points to the ultimate destination of the symphony. And even though the third movement, the slow movement, is quintessentially romantic in its sound, it definitely resembles the elegant elegiac adagios of Bach, with this somber, pulsing accompaniment. And over it, an arching, expressive melody. There is something pure about this music, and it's not surprising to learn that Schumann was again channeling Bach here, whose music provided comfort and solace as Schumann recovered from his devastating depression. He absorbed the music, and his own music was transfigured by the spirituality of Bach. Specifically, this trio for flute, violin, and continuo from Bach's musical offering. Also in C minor, also with a gentle processional sort of motion to it, and the melody of Bach. And Schumann. Great similarity there. But the third movement now moves into a more typical 19th century romantic mode with gentle fanfares in the horns and in the strings. This is the Eusebius side of Schumann's personality, dreamy and serene and lyrical. But in the middle of the movement, we hear a Baroque-like fugue, which feels very logical here since it enhances the contemplative quality of the music. The fugue begins in the second violins, very austere, while above the first violins and the clarinet hover. Here they are. Now the first violins take the melody. And so many composers did this. They toss a fugue into their symphonies, like the academic and critical world expects you to demonstrate your technical abilities. Usually these fugues are contrived, sometimes even pointless, sometimes even silly. I mean, do we need a fugue in the middle of the finale of Tchaikovsky's great Manfred Symphony? The finale which is describing an underworld orgy, in full action. I don't know, do we? But at any rate, here, the unerring brilliance of Robert Schumann in this fugue becomes apparent when the cello and bass settle on a low G, the dominant, the pedal tone, and the fugue continues in the second violins. And over this, the main theme of the movement returns in the woodwinds. A magnificent moment in this great work. And so, along with the dreamy lyricism of this third movement, there is an introspective and somber quality, almost mournful at times, emphasized by the fact that the heroic fanfare motto in the brass does not make an appearance in this movement.